Alrighty, so today we're actually in one of the very few golf course communities in Gilbert, and actually in the north part of Gilbert, above the 202. There's really only two golf course neighborhoods, and we are in Western Sky. So this isn't a giant neighborhood. It's not like one of the huge master plan communities, but it is, a pretty average size subdivision for this part of Gilbert. And if you're looking for, a golf community in a convenient location without really high price tags, this is definitely one of the better options. And I am Courtney Strelzik. I'm an agent here in Gilbert. I actually live here too, and I'm trying to highlight different neighborhoods in the area and really give you information, the stuff that you can't find on Zillow. So if you are considering moving to Gilbert and want to learn more about the area, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I have a lot of different playlists with just good neighborhood information. So let's first talk about location, because that definitely is one of the best parts of this neighborhood. So you're in a very central area of Gilbert. You have really close highway access to both the 202, and then the 60 is a little bit further north. But if you live in the East Valley, if you have highway access, it just makes everything so much easier to get around. And then just as far as like orientation in the East Valley, so you're to get to Sky Harbor Airport, which is our airport here, that's going to be about 26 minutes without traffic. Central Phoenix is going to be like a little over 30 minutes. And then if you're going to like Old Town Scottsdale, that's about 30 minutes. And that's without traffic. If you're going during rush hour, it can, sometimes typically adds about like 15 minutes to those places. But if there's a car accident or construction, something like that, it can take you a little bit longer. But as far as Gilbert goes, it's actually one of the best locations because, first off, you're really close to SanTan Village, which is our main shopping center. It's about 2 miles away. And then you're equidistant to downtown Gilbert as well. That's also, I think it's like 6-7 minute drive. And downtown's going to have a lot of, different restaurants and stuff. And then SanTan Village, that shopping center, I mean, they have everything there. It's Costco, Dick's, Nordstrom's Rack, Home Goods, all that stuff. And then a lot of restaurants too. And then there's also Agritopia, which is about 2 miles away as well. That's another great place for restaurants. There's one of my favorite coffee shops there. It's called The Coffee Shop. So really, I mean, some of the main features of the best places in Gilbert is directly surrounding this neighborhood. Now, even though you're close, I would not say these places are walkable. I mean, technically you could bike or walk there because we have, crosswalks and sidewalks and bike lanes. But I'm going to tell you, generally across the board in the East Valley, walking isn't really part of the culture here. It is, it is a bit of a suburb. But the good thing is right outside, like directly outside the neighborhood, you have Fry's, which is our main grocery store here. And then you also have Target. So those places you technically could walk to. And then another local favorite spot is the Gilbert Butchery is right on the outside. That's an amazing local butcher shop. But let's talk about the golf course, Western Skies Golf Club. One thing I do want to point out, a lot of people ask is, does the HOA give you a golf club membership? Well, the thing is, the HOA is only about $60 a month. So unfortunately, I wish golf memberships were that inexpensive, but unfortunately that does not include, it's not included in the HOA. It is a public course, and it's, a pretty casual course overall. It's pretty inexpensive. I know a lot of locals will actually go here during the winter times when rates are typically higher at other courses, just because it's a little less expensive here. Now, something like if you were coming down to Arizona on vacation, this is probably not the golf course I would recommend going to. I mean, Arizona has some crazy beautiful golf courses, like some in Scottsdale, True North, of course, over in Gold Canyon, some really, really gorgeous courses. I would say this is definitely more, you're going to see like retirees and locals. But it is a local favorite for sure. And as far as the neighborhood vibe in the houses, this is quintessential Gilbert. In this part of Gilbert, we saw a huge housing boom in the 90s, and that's when most of these homes were built. So it definitely has, that traditional Gilbert vibe. You're going to find the stucco siding, you're going to find the clay tile roofs. And like I said, it's a pretty medium-sized community. You have a couple hundred homes in here, and you're going to find a mix of 2-story homes and single level. Now, I will say this neighborhood does have a little bit more options for 2-story homes than single family homes. And then there is one section too that has more of like a patio style home. So it's an actual detached house. You aren't sharing walls with any neighbors, but it's on a smaller lot. And then, some of them are set up so you have like a shared driveway entrance with your neighbors. But these are definitely much more affordable options. I think there was maybe 2 in the past year that sold under $400,000, which is really hard to come by in this part of Gilbert, actually. But that is just one section of the neighborhood. And then the rest of the neighborhood is going to be more traditional size lots. You're going to find a lot of lots between 6,000 to 8,000 square feet. And if those numbers mean nothing to you, basically you have room for a pool and then a little bit of a yard space. And then there are some cul-de-sac lots. I call them the pie-shaped lots. These lots are definitely going to have bigger backyards. Not a lot of them, but there's, I would say probably, maybe a couple dozen that have these larger homes. So if you're lucky, you might score one of these. And as far as the actual size of the homes, if you're looking at one of those smaller homes on the smaller lots, you will find homes that are like 12 to 1,500 square feet. So it's going to be more of a starter type home, not a lot of room. But the other homes are going to be between 2,000 to 3,000 square feet. So pretty average size house. You're going to find a lot of like 4-bedroom homes, maybe 2.5 baths, maybe even 3. And one thing about this neighborhood too, and this is kind of a theme with a lot of neighborhoods in this part of Gilbert, you'll notice this if you watch my other videos. Some of the homes have been renovated, beautifully upgraded, beautiful finishes. Others are the original finishes from the 90s, so slightly outdated. We're kind of just in that transition period where we're just kind of seeing homes being renovated here. Definitely have seen some flips in this neighborhood as well. Full transparency. Some were really good quality flips, and then some were a little bit pig with lipstick. So you definitely want to make sure you're doing your inspections and seeing what kind of renovations a flipper did if you're looking at that type of home. But for the most part, I would say the homes that have been renovated were actually it wasn't an investor. It was actually someone that resided in the home and owned the home. And as far as price point, for those smaller houses, like I mentioned, there was a couple that were under 400, but most of them are going to be in that $400,000 to $500,000 range. But as far as the more traditional single family homes, those were starting in the 500s, and then we saw a couple. I think the highest priced one that sold this past year was $775,000. But this was on the golf course, so that does increase the value of the home a little bit. And then it was also beautifully renovated. And while we're talking about homes on the golf course, yes, this will increase the value of a home. Another thing to be aware of is, I think most people are aware of this, but if you're on the golf course, you may be in the pathway of a golf ball. So we do see a fair amount of houses. The HOA does allow for nets to be put up in the backyard just to prevent any damage to your home. It is something we see. Now, it just depends if you're going to be at risk of getting hit by golf balls. It just depends on your orientation on the golf course. And so when my clients are looking at these lots, my husband, who's also a real estate agent, he's a big golfer, so I always ask him to see what the risk, because if you have to put up a net, it's, for some people that really ruins the aesthetic of and the point of being on a golf course. So it may not be worth it for you. So definitely something to be aware of before you purchase the home, because you don't want that surprise. And as I mentioned, the HOA, it's going to range between $50 and $60 depending on exactly which area of the neighborhood that you are in. So overall, pretty inexpensive. There is a community park that I'm at right now. I'll show you some videos. It has some green spaces. There's a basketball court, playground, swings, sand volleyball, really pretty park. And then the HOA is managed by a third party management company, RCP. They manage a handful of neighborhoods in Gilbert, actually. And overall, as an HOA, I haven't heard them being super strict. The biggest complaints I've heard is, weeds in the front yard. I do believe they have a color palette you have to choose from if you are repainting the exterior of your house. And they also do not allow for like an additional dwelling unit in an ADU, such as like a casita or an additional garage. And really, there's just these lots. I mean, they're decent size for sure, but definitely not large enough to accommodate this. So if you are looking for something like that, it's probably best to go to like a neighborhood that doesn't either have an HOA or has larger lots, and the HOA allows for this. And as far as just the inspections or things to be aware of, again, this is really, really common for this part of town, homes that were built in the 90s. So they're going to have the clay tile roofs, and the underlayment under the clay tile, usually a lot of roofers will say 25 years. I have seen some that are about 30 years that have been in okay shape and haven't had any leaking. But this is a really, really common thing during the inspection report that comes up that is an item and a more expensive item that needs to be replaced. So a general inspector will actually look, they're going to go up into the attic and see if there's any water stains. They're going to lift some of the tiles and see if the underlayment is brittle or it's cracking and it's at risk of causing a leak if we get another crazy monsoon, next summer. But often if it is pretty brittle, they're expecting that it's close to end of life, they will recommend a roofer to come out. Now, the one thing about roofers it's important to understand here is there are some roofers or some companies that are commission-based companies. So if they come out, I've seen them come out and say like a 10-year-old roof needs major repairs when there's no sign of leaking. So I usually recommend if you're going to have a roofer come out, try to avoid one that's a commission-based company if you can. There's definitely a couple of small family-owned businesses I know in the area that are just very honest people, very transparent people, and that's usually who I recommend to my clients. So kind of something I don't know, just to be aware of, because I've seen people really be led astray by some roofers. But overall, if you're looking for a golf community, want to be in a central location, a good location, and you're in that like $500,000 to $800,000 price point, or I should say $400,000 to $800,000 price point, definitely a place I would at least drive around and explore. Haven't really heard anyone say bad things about Western Skies. And I also do have a playlist right here where I talk about a lot of different neighborhoods in Gilbert. So check that out if you want to do more research. Thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic day.